I am going to start. The presentation this evening is focused on breed selection for small-scale chicken farming. I have put together information based on some of my research and experience, personal experience with raising chickens. As we go through the presentation, I will be sharing my screen, so you'll get to see some of the information and pictures as well. We are recording. While I'm presenting, I will do my best to notice what's going on, but if you do have a question, I encourage you to kindly interrupt. It's not a problem to ask a question, but when not asking a question, if everybody could keep themselves on mute so we don't have any background noise. I have the presentation, and then hopefully we'll have time for questions and discussion if everybody or anyone is interested in that as well. So let me share my screen and kind of get us set and oriented to what we're going to cover this evening. What I was able to do in the presentation is really just think through some of the things we might think about when we decide we want to add chickens to our space, but what are all the items to consider to get it right and make it a positive experience. So everybody should be able to see the slides now. They've been shared. If somebody could just be kind enough to let me know that you can see the slides. But so I was trying to just think about how can we set ourselves up to pick the breeds that really fit our needs and our space. Because everybody has a different space that they're adding chickens to, and everybody has a different purpose for wanting to add chickens to their space. So I tried to think of all those things. We'll highlight a few breeds specifically, but we'll also talk about different things to consider. Many of the photos in this presentation, if they're not identified as where the photos came from, those were photos that I've been able to take with chickens I've been around, whether they are some of my own or ones that I've gotten to work with. So the things I wanted to cover this evening is I wanted to make sure we looked at the purpose of having chickens, because there's different purposes and reasons why people have chickens. But then also all of the chickens by breed have general behaviors. Now, each individual is truly an individual, but breeds have behaviors as well, things that they do well with or not well with, and we're going to look at some of that as well. I'll take some time also to talk about how to find the birds and breeds you want, sourcing those breeds, because there's actually quite a bit to talk about when we start thinking about poultry breeds and specifically chicken breeds that are available to us. There are lots to choose from. And chicken breeds have been established since 1873. So the idea of a chicken breed is nothing new. It's been around for a long time, with the American Poultry Association actually defining these breeds, the original standard breeds. And in 1873, the way agriculture was practiced was different than today. So what we have in the original American Poultry Association breeds is we have breeds identified that they are actually really good at living in the outdoors, in the environment around them. So not indoor. And then also they looked at the birds that were truly going to live a long time. So instead of a bird that would live for a short time and get to harvest or slaughter quickly, they looked for long-lived birds, because these were not just for individuals' business of selling, but also for their family. It was food. And then also they were reproductively sound, which means they would be producing eggs for a long time, whether that was for consumption, eggs to eat, or chicks to replace the flock. But then more recently, some of the needs in our chicken breeds changed. We were more interested in the chickens that would grow faster, or having options for chickens that would grow faster. And there are some birds raised for meat that really are only alive for a few weeks before they're ready to harvest for that meat. So we're going to consider both situations and both possibilities, but I did want to highlight that there is, according to the Livestock Conservancy, an actual statement on the value of those heritage breeds, those original breeds that the American Poultry Association established in the 1800s. And they really make a case for these breeds have really specific genetics, and that those genetics could become really helpful to us if there's a new poultry disease that we're trying to understand and combat, or as the climate does change and we're looking for breeds that'll be more adapted to whatever that changing climate is, that those heritage breeds hold really interesting and unique genetics. If we lose those breeds, we don't have those genetics anymore. And there are heritage breeds that have been lost and some that are low in numbers. They're just not very popular anymore. But I thought this was an interesting case for heritage breeds, especially how those genetics could help us in the future as we have new challenges in agriculture. Now, when we start talking about the breeds and the purpose of the breeds, we really have three decisions to make. Do we want to have chickens for meat? Do we want to have chickens for eggs? Or do we want them for both meat and eggs, which is called dual purpose? There are options within the meat birds, there's options within the egg-laying birds, there's the layers, and then there are a few birds that are actually truly good for providing good tasty, good quality meat and a good number of eggs. So when choosing birds, you really need to know, what do you want? The home scale poultry may like that dual purpose bird, may want both some small scale ability to butcher at home and then also have fresh eggs. There might be a farming operation that very much wants to bring meat, chicken into their community, that nobody else is doing that. So they would choose a breed that really just is specialized for meat birds. Or maybe those fresh eggs are something that there's a demand for, and you focus on a breed that lays a good number of eggs, a dependable bird for that. So defining your purpose is really where you start out. But once you figure out if you want meat birds, layers, egg-laying birds, or both, then you really want to look at the conditions that you can raise them in or provide for them, and how well they are adapted to the conditions here. So the seasons change. We're in Ohio, and even within different parts of Ohio, some parts of Ohio have much colder winters, some parts have much warmer summers, and we want to look at how hardy or how adapted that bird is to the specific place you will be raising them. We have, in the past few summers, had some really hot spells, right? Unseasonably hot weather. Well, birds can get heat stress just like us. So finding birds that are really heat tolerant is becoming more of a concern, something to consider. If you have birds that are going to be outside, and especially if you don't have a lot of shade to provide them or a way to cool them, that's something that's becoming more of a consideration maybe than in the past. And then when it comes to the comb size of the birds, the red part on the top of their head, that's how they regulate heat, or one of the ways they regulate heat. So a bigger comb in the summer, lots of blood can pump through there. It may help the bird cool down more compared to a small comb. But on the flip side, in the winter, that big comb, like the black and white bird in the bottom corner picture, that big comb can actually get frostbite. So in colder climates, and if there isn't supplemental heat, like a heat lamp provided for the bird in really cold weather, the tips of that comb could actually get frostbite and die. So the teeny tiny comb, like the birds on the top pictures, might do better in those colder spaces that don't have supplemental heat. The teeny tiny comb, like the bird that is white and gray in the center top, that's a pea comb, teeny tiny comb. But if you look at the 5 birds picture, they all have very different size combs. And that is a distinction of the breed. Those are 5 different breeds of chickens. Roosters tend to have larger combs than the hens do. So if you're going to have a rooster, and it's breed with a bigger comb, that's even something to look at closer in winter time, is keeping those combs warm. So that's seasonal hardiness is really something important to consider. And the needs from southern Ohio to northern Ohio are truly different. The other behavior or another behavior when we're talking about the chickens is something called broodiness. It's just a natural instinct of the hens to want to sit on eggs. They naturally are going to be birds that they lay eggs, they sit on the eggs hatch. And that behavior, if you want to have chicks and you have hens and you have a rooster and you have fertilized eggs, that broody behavior can be great. That can be a good thing. If you want eggs and you're not hoping to have chicks, you don't actually need that broody behavior. It's not necessarily harmful when it happens for just a short while in a few days, but it can be harmful or stressful to the chickens if a particular chicken, and certain breeds tend to be broodier, sits on eggs for a long time, especially if those are not fertilized eggs, they're not hatching, they get collected every day, they're disappearing, and this individual broody chicken keeps sitting on the eggs. That means she's not eating or drinking as much as she normally would. She's not moving around as much, scratching. So she's actually, it could be losing that body health, that body condition. Um, and it could be stressful for her if she insists on being broody. Another potential problem with broody behavior is not actually for the chicken that's sitting on the eggs, it's for the other chickens that want to lay eggs in the same nesting area. A broody chicken can end up being defensive and make it harder for other chickens to get into that space to lay eggs. Um, Often the broody behavior will happen for a short while, and then the hen will move on. She'll get, I don't know, bored. She'll stop laying on the eggs. Sometimes though they're stubborn and you need to displace them, encourage them not to be so broody. And sometimes those broody chickens can be kind of aggressive towards you when you're trying to collect the eggs that are under them. It's really no fun to get pecked at every day when you're collecting eggs. But bigger picture, broodiness isn't a sickness. It's not bad per se. It's a natural thing. But by breed, there are breeds that do better at being broody if you need that to hatch chicks, and then others that aren't as good. Other behaviors to consider in addition to broodiness, there's actually quite a few. The chickens, and I mentioned earlier, you want to match their behavior to what conditions you can provide for them. So if you want conditions for chickens that they're going to be in a coop and have a very small area that stays put, like in the same place all the time, that means they're eventually going to be on dirt. They'll destroy all the vegetation, and you'll be putting bedding out and straw all the time. um, you want a chicken that can handle that confinement or small space. There's other chickens that would do a lot better if they had just these wide open spaces, what we would call free range. And then there's the pasture chickens that have maybe smaller spaces, but those spaces are moved around onto fresh grass, fresh pasture. And different breeds do better in those different situations. So do they want that confinement, that free range pasture? The behavior they show towards you to the other chickens. There's all sorts of behaviors. If you're going to be around those chickens all the time and you want to be able to work with those chickens, if you're going to have guests on your farm, you probably don't want breeds that tend to be more aggressive. But if you have a lot of predator concerns and you need those chickens to just be more alert and defend themselves, a bit more of an aggressive behavior could be helpful. Um, if you have a bird or a breed that's really flighty and nervous, it makes it hard to work with them at times, because every time you go towards the coop, you want to replace the water, refill the food. They scatter, they bump into things, crash into things. They could even hurt themselves. So that flighty, nervous behavior could actually be um, detrimental to the chicken's well-being. And then it also makes you really extra kind of cautious and on your toes all the time. If you're in a space where you need to kind of keep the chickens on the down low, those noisy chickens that just chatter a lot may not be a good choice. Roosters, they cock-a-doodle-doo. They make a lot of noise. So if you want to be really cautious with your neighbors if they're not so sure about you having chickens, not having a rooster is probably a good idea because they don't just make noise in the morning to wake you up. It happens any time of the day. But lots of things to consider. And if you want to be able to use these chickens to introduce others to being around farm animals or just animals in general, certain breeds honestly are easier to handle for you and anyone else. So if you take a look at the picture that I have, um, there is a single chicken in the center. She's sitting next to two dogs. In the background of the picture, if you look really closely in the background, on the right, there's this little whitish blob. That's actually a chicken waterer. That's down in a fenced area with electric net fence where the chicken is supposed to be. So with some of the behaviors that we just talked about, look at that picture and consider some words that might describe this chicken's behavior. So I would say this is a pretty friendly chicken, not aggressive. She's hanging out by dogs. She'll probably hang out with people too. She doesn't want to stay in, or she didn't stay in where she's supposed to be. So she might prefer free range life. She also might be a flyer, like she can actually really take flight and get up and over whatever that fence is for her, which means she might also be able to get up and over the like perimeter fence on this property and escape completely, which could be a problem. Um, are all of these behaviors problems? Not necessarily. A friendly chicken can actually be really enjoyable and fun, and free range is great if you have the space. Um, but keeping your chickens where they're supposed to be, where you need them to be, that is important. This is a chicken that if she continues to escape might be one that we would do something called clipping her wings. Just one side of her wings would be shortened to make her uneven in flight so she couldn't fly and escape so much. So what else can we consider about chickens? The actual size of the birds. Chickens range from 4 pounds to 13 pounds. That is a huge difference in size. If you're holding a 13-pound bird, I mean, you know you're holding a 13-pound bird. That little 4-pound bird, she's going to be a very light little bird. So the bird on the left is a 4 to 6-pound bird. It's Americana breed. And the bird on the right is a Brahma, a buff Brahma. They're one of the ones that have feathers on their legs. That's a big bird. That one's more in the 9.5 to 12-pound range for that breed. The bigger weights for a breed are the roosters. The hens are always lighter, smaller than the roosters. But imagine the difference in size if those two birds were standing right next to each other. A 4-pound bird versus a 9.5-pound bird. Big difference. And this gets into a consideration too if you're going to have many different breeds, mixed breeds in the same space. A bigger breed could possibly beat up a smaller breed, not necessarily. It's really a concern, though, when we talk about roosters. If you're going to have a rooster in the flock, it's important that your rooster is not one of the bigger, heavier breeds, because that rooster, when he does mate with a hen, that heavy, extra heavy weight on top of a hen could actually hurt them, damage them, and ultimately could cause injuries and death. So a small Americana rooster, maybe 5 pounds-ish, would actually probably be just fine in a situation where other hens were bigger than it. It couldn't hurt it. Whereas the other way around, a Brahma rooster and a Americana hen would be a poor pairing. So size does matter. We do want to match the right size birds to the space you have, to your comfort level. A 13-pound bird is pretty big. And then also keeping in mind how they might interact with each other with bullying. Now, when we get into some of the specific breeds, and that's what I wanted to really focus on now that we looked at a few things to consider, What I wanted to look at were a few specific breeds. We'll hit meat birds, we'll do purpose birds after that, and then egg layers after that. So when we talk about meat birds, you hear them often called broilers. Broiler isn't a specific breed, it's a terminology for a meat bird. The Cornish cross is what we see used quite commonly in this area. And what's so neat about the Cornish cross is how quickly it grows, how efficient it is for the amount of food it eats or doesn't need to eat to grow as fast as it grows. In just 6 weeks, this bird is ready to be butchered and then sold or enjoyed as meat, right? A 5 to 6 pound bird in 6 weeks. You can have a nice chicken dinner. Something that I think is even more interesting is a second purpose for this breed, the Cornish cross. You can also butcher at about 4 weeks. The bird will be about 2 pounds, and it can be used more like a Cornish game hen, right? A little specialty meat there too. So it's got some nice options. It is definitely a bird that does better inside though. And it can do well with a lot of birds in a small space. If it does go out and pasture, like in a small chicken tractor and gets moved around, especially early in the season, like this time of year, in the spring or in the fall, when we do get those cool rains, it's very sensitive to that. So you really have to protect it from the weather. Like the rain that we're getting across most of the state right now, it's cool, it's windy, it's wet. These are not birds that can handle that kind of weather. I did list prices on all the birds we're going to look at from here on out of chicks. They were prices that were pulled from an Ohio hatchery, reputable hatchery, this winter in about February. These are the prices. These are all straight run prices, which means the birds are, in this case, this is a straight run, which means these are birds, they're day-old chicks, and they have not been sexed. So there'll be males and females in this group. For a meat bird that is going to be butchered in 6 weeks, it doesn't actually matter if you have males and females both. When we get into the layers for egg laying, then we're looking for females specifically. So another meat bird, and one of interest if you don't want to do confinement, but you want to actually get a meat bird out on pasture, the rangers are something to consider. Now, this is a red ranger specifically, but there's also freedom rangers, gray rangers, rainbow rangers. They're all in this like ranger category. These are birds that were developed by the French. So they are French birds, and they do well in that pasture setting. But the trade-off to put them out on pasture is, if you recall the Cornish ones that we just looked at, they were at the 5 to 6 pounds in 6 weeks. Well, this is 9 to 11 weeks to get the Red Ranger up to a butchering size for a chicken, a whole chicken that you would be able to sell. So it does take longer on pasture for this breed. But if your audience, your customer wants a pastured bird or a free range meat bird, this is a good choice. Also, when we look at the markets, we're always talking about what does the customer want too, if we're selling bees. So if your customer is looking for a pastured bird, this is one that's a good one. If they want something that is a non-GMO, so you might not have, like, say, an organic certification or something like that, but a non-GMO bird as it comes from the hatchery, and then you are continuing to feed it non-GMO feed, or maybe you are giving it organic feed at this point, right? You do have options with this breed to have both of those. The price is more for a non-GMO, but these are reasonable prices if you can get that return on investment when you go to sell later on. Now, another meat bird in the ranger group is the gray ranger. And I know we were just talking about rangers, but I wanted to highlight this one because it just has a really interesting history. So it's in that ranger group. So a lot of the details you saw on the past slide for red ranger are exactly the same. What's interesting about this gray ranger, also called a kosher king, um, is that it was actually extremely popular in the 1940s before we had the Cornish cross developed. So this is what would have been the most popular, one of the most popular meat birds prior to the Cornish cross being developed. Again, though, that 9 to 11 weeks to get to 6 pounds, it just, once the Cornish cross came out and we had 6 weeks to get to 5 to 6 pounds, it just didn't compete. But this is one that has been around for a while and has a good history, good quality meat. And I thought it was worth mentioning that. So we have all these different chickens to choose from. Some fall out of favor at different times, but they're still good birds. All right, so let's move into some truly dual purpose birds. And when, we have this dual purpose bird like the buckeye that I have featured here, there are folks that have flocks of buckeyes just for meat. There are folks that have flocks of buckeyes for eggs. And there are folks that have flocks of buckeyes that they are butchering some of the birds for meat, but they're also keeping some of those birds for a longer amount of time for eggs as well. So you've got options with this bird. This is truly an Ohio bird. It was developed in Ohio. So we can be proud of this one. The buckeye, I find the buckeye's personality to be really laid back. They're not super interested in being around people or the other chickens. They're not that like center of attention chicken, but they are excellent foragers. They do a really good job of scratching around and taking care of themselves. They do very well in winter because of that pea comb, that tiny comb. They're a nice big body. They're kind of a hardy bird. They're solid. But they do very well in our climate, and definitely one to check out. They lay a good amount of eggs and they stay productive for quite a while. Generally, the egg layers kind of peak production in year 3, but they'll continue to lay, just not as many eggs for a few years after that. But if you recall the picture I showed of broody chickens when we were talking about broodiness, that was a buckeye in that picture. They do have a tendency to be broody. Another dual purpose bird is called the Delaware. This one is also a really good forager and does well in that pasture setting or that open setting. If you are processing them, we're looking at a smaller bird, less weight, so that's 2.5 to 3 pounds in the 12 to 16 weeks. So you're going to have good meat, but it's going to take longer and you're not going to have as much of it. So that is something to consider. Now, this was was developed in Delaware, as the name suggests. And I just realized as I was talking, I need to correct myself. This one, the Delaware, is the one that was that Cornish cross overtook it in popularity for the meat side of the birds. I mentioned that earlier with the gray ranger, but let me correct myself. This one, the Delaware, is who was super popular until the 1940s, or after the 1940s. Then Cornish cross got really popular. Their personality is really interesting because while they apparently, they're friendly with people, they like being around people, they can be pushy with the other chickens. And, it's a good thing to be able to defend yourself, but you don't want to necessarily be bullying the other chickens. That's not a behavior you want to see a whole lot of. So, but it is an interesting one to consider. It is a true dual purpose bird. And then the next one that I want to highlight can be used as a dual purpose bird, but isn't considered a true dual purpose. This is a bird that you would have in your flock the Australorp for eggs. But if you wanted to harvest some of them for meat, you would have good meat. But you wouldn't find a flock of just Australorps as meat birds. So that's the difference where we're talking about ones that you have a flock of them as layers, and maybe you purchase your birds as a straight run, so they're day-old chicks, they're not sexed, and you buy 50 birds. As they're maturing, you realize you've got about 20 that are males and 30 that are females. You keep those 30 females to lay eggs, and those 20 males, before they mature fully as roosters, you're able to harvest them, you butcher them, and then you've got 20 chickens as meat birds. So that's how that dual purpose layer situation might work for you. But the Australorp is a good sized bird, up into 8.5 pounds. It's solid. They tend to be taller birds than the Buckeye that we recently looked at, longer legs. Decent sized comb, and definitely a big enough comb to have some concerns with frostbite in winter. But even within the breed itself, there's a lot of variation in comb size. But they do well in winter. They're 100% able to handle winter and able to handle summer. So they're a good one to consider. They because they are a good sized bird, they can end up being a little pushy with some of the other birds at times, but nothing crazy. They can be broody. I have had personal experience with some very broody Australorps, to the point that I noticed body condition issues with the chicken, just because you're broody for a long time, it catches up to you. But overall, very good hardy bird for our area, and one I think is worth considering in a flock. A super popular one that you see available in many places is the Easter egger. They're named Easter egger because their eggs are fun colors. It's not brown, it's not white, but blue eggs, olive-ish eggs. They're fun just because of that. They also come in all sorts of color patterns. The Easter egger is sometimes also called Americana. So that would be spelled like America with an N-A at the end. This is not a very big bird. They're small, so they do tend to be able to take flight easily because there's not a lot of weight to them. I find them to be very, very social birds, very fun to have around people. People enjoy them. And they're productive. They lay a good number of eggs. What is nice about this bird, because of the green and the blue eggs, if you are selling your eggs and you're looking to stand out, having a dozen eggs for sale with a couple blue or olive eggs in the mix is kind of fun. Not necessarily always having to have all the same color egg when you sell eggs, but having a mix of eggs can really help you stand out. Now, there is another breed that sounds like Americana, but you can see its spelling here on the slide. It has a Amerau, Americana. That is a different breed. It is recognized by the American Poultry Association, but it's not a very common breed. It's a almost like a collector breed, but $26 to $40 a chick. This is a chicken that you might get for fun because you love them a whole lot. But if you are looking at adding chickens to your small farm, it's tough when selling eggs to recoup the cost of a $26 chick. The $4.10 for the Easter egger is much more palatable for that. The Easter eggers, though, are widely available. The Americana, that more expensive breed I'm mentioning, is not one that you would see just about anywhere. You'd have to look a little harder for that. But these are fun ones, the Easter eggers, to consider in the mix. I want to highlight one that is a well-known breed, the Rhode Island Red. This is not by any means uncommon. It's quite common. And it's because it's so productive, like a lot of eggs. Good sized bird. It does well around here. It does have that big comb, so it can be a little bit challenging at times in winter with a really big comb, especially on a rooster. The picture, the Rhode Island Red in this picture is a rooster. You can see it's got longer tail feathers and then that really big comb. So that's how I'm quickly looking at it and telling that it is a rooster. And one thing about the Rhode Island Red breed that I struggle with, despite how productive they are, like they lay eggs, they can be aggressive. The roosters are definitely aggressive, but even the hens, they tend to just be an aggressive breed. So if you have a mixed breed flock, the Rhode Island Reds can actually be a little bit difficult because of that aggression. But if you want a really productive egg-laying flock, the Rhode Island Reds are a really good choice. So pluses and minuses with all these breeds. Always pluses and minuses for all of them. Let's see, what's another good one to highlight as a dual purpose layer? The Buff Orpington. The Buff Orpington is a highly productive bird too, which means, it lays a lot of eggs. It's a really big bodied bird. Those hens can get up to 10 pounds. They are a really nice independent kind of bird. You don't have to work too hard for them, but you do have to provide them relief from hot summer weather because they are big bodied. They do struggle when we get those really hot spells, when it's over 90 degrees, when it's really humid, when it's the kind of weather that makes us feel crummy too. The Buff Orpington struggles. So if you don't have a way to cool them down, to give them shade, to replace the water so it's cool all the time, this is a breed that will struggle. On the flip side, they do great in winter. They're really, really good in a winter space that has no supplemental heat whatsoever. So big bird and a lot of eggs, really nice, good sized eggs too. I didn't mention this earlier, but eggs come in different sizes as well. Just because you have a big bird doesn't mean you're going to get a big egg, but it does tend to work out like that. And the Buff Orpington does give you a really large egg and a lot. Now this breed is actually the last one we're going to highlight. And I have it last, and I'll be real honest, it's because it's one I personally like a lot. The New Hampshire Red. This bird is a medium-sized bird, right? So not as big as what we just looked at with the Buff Orpington. It's a bit smaller than the Australorp, but it's bigger than the Easter egger, the Americana. Just a good medium-sized bird. They're not a thick body. They're kind of a thin-bodied bird. They do really well in all of our weather, all of our climates, and they lay quite a few eggs. I find them to be sociable and friendly, but not necessarily always right there around your feet when you're trying to do stuff. They are just all around good birds that I've had a lot of success with. I think they're a good one to consider as a first chicken. If you've not had chickens before, this is a nice one to start with for a breed, because I can't come up with any specific watch out for this or that type problems with them. But the New Hampshire Red, their comb is also a medium-sized comb, so you don't really have many problems with it in winter. Getting too cold in the summer, they seem to cool themselves well. So yeah, all around New Hampshire Red is a good option. Now with all these different birds that I've mentioned, and there's many, many more breeds that we could talk about too, you do have to source your birds, and I really encourage you to make sure that you do some research on what hatchery you want to work with. You want to get healthy birds. The National Poultry Improvement Program they have a list of hatcheries that are essentially like approved by them, accredited by them, so to say, like these are reputable hatcheries that are practicing raising these chicks, these birds in hatcheries to be healthy, providing vaccinations before you buy that bird. It comes already vaccinated, so it's on its way for good health. How will the hatcheries be sending the birds to you? You can go to hatcheries often and pick up your birds, but chicks also get mailed through the US Postal Service. They get mailed. But how will they be mailed? Are you going to have some sort of heat source in the container that the chicks are sent with? Will the hatchery be sending you kind of essentially like an electrolyte mix to give those chicks as soon as they arrive to help rehydrate them and give them an extra boost for their health? Take time to get to know that hatchery before you buy the bird to ensure that you have the best chance of getting a really healthy bird. Not just good genetics, but one that's been taken care of from before it even hatched out of the egg. But that National Poultry Improvement Program will give you a list of hatcheries to consider and let you know where they are, so you can find ones in Ohio, ones that are close to you. I would be remiss if I didn't mention with poultry health, avian influenza. Avian influenza has been in the news the past year, a little more than that now, actually. This is not a new virus. It is a flu. It is an influenza. And a bird who does get sick and is untreated can die. It can result in death. So when we do have our birds, we want to make sure that we are watching them. We are observing them. We do need to know our birds so we know if something changes. A really severe case of avian influenza might show those purple legs, like in the picture I have here, but just a general bird that, normally a healthy bird, and you notice that it's gasping or not breathing well, or that it has diarrhea, like really extreme diarrhea, like these are things that we can't wait to have checked, because often the birds don't even show they're sick until they're really sick. And that's true with any sickness with chickens. But we do want to be looking for that. What happens for the flocks that have had avian influenza confirmed? The whole flock it's called depopulated, but it's euthanized to prevent the spread, because it is just really easy to spread. Another way to protect our birds, especially birds that are outside from avian influenza, is just limiting contact with wild birds, because that is how it's spread. And certain types of birds are more likely to spread it. But I did want to make sure to at least mention that, to know that it is something that we are looking at. Most of the avian influenza situations that flocks have had to be depopulated or euthanized have been in confined situations, lots of birds in small spaces versus big open pasture spaces. But there have been cases in all settings. So it is something that really does exist to be aware of. And there's a lot more to be aware of with poultry farming. This is just one of our beginning poultry farming presentations. We do have more, and we're always wondering what you're interested in, as we are happy to develop more programs based on everyone's interests and needs throughout the state. We do have a Getting Started with Chickens presentation that's available in both webinar form or in person, as well as many other programs. So I am happy to be a resource for poultry farming for you, and myself and our team of Ag and Natural Resources educators is most definitely a resource for you too. So with that, I am happy to open it up for any questions or comments.